Welcome to Storytime with Chris Horner. I'm Chris Horner. And today's Storytime, guys, I want to talk about the 2010 Tour de France and why the Grand Tours are so spectacular. Okay, if you look at the Grand Tours and you compare them to the one-week races that are 7 to 10 days long, the big difference, what makes the Grand Tour so special, is the drama. There is always going to be drama. If you took your own family members and you tied them all up and you pinned them together for 21 days, there's bound to be drama, right? Well, you got 170 to 200 plus riders, depending on which year of the Tour de France we're talking about, and you got 21 days of racing, so there's going to be some drama. Now, in 2010 is the story I want to talk about, and I wanted to get into stage 3 of the cobblestone stage of that year's 2010 Tour de France, because there was all kinds of drama in the Radio Shack team that year. Now, when we look at the Tour de France in general, when you look at 2010, you think, wow, when you start thinking about that race, it was the year where in stage 2 we were racing in Belgium through Spa, and they neutralized the race. The riders did, not the officials, but all the riders neutralized the race, and I'll get to that story on one time further here in the Chris Horner Story Times. But when you look at 2010, you had that on stage 2. You had the cobblestones on stage 3. You had stage 7, 8 when Lance Armstrong crashed out spectacularly and lost any chance of winning the general classification of the 2010 Tour de France. But the drama wasn't even over. You go into stage 15, Cote de Balles, when Andy Schleck dropped his chain and Alberto Contador lit him up to take the race leader's yellow jersey in the 2010 Tour, only later to test positive and lose it to Andy Schleck. There was all kinds of drama in 2010. When you fast forward and you start looking at some of the other Tour de France years, 2014, I think, was the biggest Tour de France drama that never happened because, of course, Alberto Contador ended up crashing out and hurting his knee. Chris Froome ended up crashing out before the cobblestones of that year's Tour de France, before we even reached the first cobblestone. I know because I was right behind it when he crashed. And then when you start going further and you look at 2018 when Garrett Thomas won and he beat Chris Froome, the guy who was the king there on Team Sky, well, there was some drama there. Go into 2020, remember that year? Oh man, stage 20, the individual time trial, when Tadej Pogačar came out of the box and took the race leader's yellow jersey on the penultimate stage of the Tour de France from his Slovenian compatriot. That was an amazing Tour de France. So every year, the Grand Tours always hold drama, and it doesn't have to be the Tour de France. I could take you back to last year's Vuelta a España. Remember that drama for Sepp Kuss? And he had to battle against his own teammates. That's what makes the Grand Tour special. But in this 2010 year, on stage 3, I want to talk about the betrayal. The betrayal and lies that happened throughout the cobblestone stage of stage 3 of the 2010 Tour de France. But before we get into that, I got to back you up. Before the Tour de France even started, as the Radio Shack team all flew into the north of France so we can preview the cobblestone stage. Well, we flew in, we had a good night's sleep, and the next morning we had a nice breakfast. The sun was out, it was looking gorgeous, and we had 9 Radio Shack teammates there. Now, we had 3 guys that were going for GC, but one main guy, his name's Lance Armstrong. You might remember him. The next guy, of course, Levi Leipheimer, and then the other guy, Andreas Kloden. Those were our 3 guys to go for general classification, but clearly it was Lance Armstrong's team because it was called Team Radio Shack. And when you start looking at the other climbers, Yanni Brajkovic, he was there, and of course I was there. There's 5 solid climbers, and then we had Jaroslav Popovic, aka Popo. He was there, and he was always the main lieutenant for Lance Armstrong throughout multiple times throughout his victories in earlier years. So you know Popovic was always able and capable of looking after a teammate to 100%. Sergio Paulino was there, the Portuguese rider, fabulous domestique. He can climb good, he can ride the flats, marvelous rider. And then there was Rasta, Gregory Rast, the Swiss rider. He was super domestique on all the flats, and he had a little bit of help too with Dmitry Moriev. Now, Moriev was absolutely solid on all the flats, and then when it started to climb up a little bit more, like Gregory Rast, that's when they started to suffer a little bit. But on stage 3, on a cobblestone stage, you know when you're talking about Rasta and Dmitry Moriev that those were going to be 2 big-time lieutenants to look after Lance Armstrong and all of us little guys like Yanni Brajkovic and myself. So as we get into the pre-training ride before the Tour de France stages even start, we're there riding the cobblestones and we're flying. I'm on the wheel of Lance Armstrong as we're doing the preview of the cobbles, and I'm looking at my power meter and it's reading 500 plus watts as we're going through the cobbles. And this was the moment when I thought, wow, Lance Armstrong might win number 8 Tour de France, because he is flying right now on spectacular form. We had a great preview to the cobblestones there. Then we hopped in the private jet and we flew off to the Netherlands to start stage 1, the prologue, which is really stage 0 because they don't have stage 1 if it's called a prologue. So when we get into the prologue, of course, Lance Armstrong goes well and he places top 5. That makes it solid that we know he's the race leader for Radio Shack, and he's on fantastic form, just a little over 20 seconds off of winning time of Fabian Cancellara. Now, Cancellara was flying, but Cancellara had other duties he had to look after because he had 2 brothers. And those 2 brothers, Andy and Frank, are his teammates, and they are solid riders to win the general classification of the 2010 Tour de France. Now, just behind Lance Armstrong on that first stage prologue, there was Alberto Contador, and he was the big time favorite because, well, we all know he's won some Tour de France's himself too. So he's riding there for Astana. The Schleck brothers are riding for Saxo, and they got Fabian Cancellara as their teammate. And Radio Shack, my team's got a host of good talent, so we look like it's going to be a dogfight when we start getting into the climbs here at the Tour de France. But everybody has been worried about this stage 3 cobblestone stage since the January 1st, if not the year before, when the ASO organizers released it. Many times throughout the season, my director sportif would come up to me and he'd go, it was Alain Gallopin, and he'd go, Chris, remember, there's some cobblestones coming. Maybe you want to go up and preview. I said, Gallo, I grew up racing in the U.S. doing criteriums. I don't need to preview the cobblestones. I just need to see it one time right before the tour starts so I know where that last corner is before the cobbles start. And don't worry about me, I'll be in good position because I grew up doing crits throughout the first 10 years of my career. And now I'm old enough and experienced enough to know exactly where to be when the cobblestone starts. Well, the stage gets on the way after stage 2. And stage 2 had some drama, like I told you, with all the crashes. But we still know that the main GC guys are all intact as the cobblestones start. Now this is going to be a long stage, about 210, 215 kilometers long, and 6 sections of cobblestones, but the road would be narrow and twisty before we get into the cobbles, and the drama would start just about there. Now as we start coming closer into the cobblestones, we're getting far, and up the road going solo up there is going to be Ryder Hegedal, and he's riding for Garmin. Now behind this getting action is getting packed, and it's Fabian Cancellara and his Saxo Bank teammates are on his wheel as they're drilling it coming into the cobblestones. In my ear going off like crazy was Johan Bernil, our general manager, who's the director, sitting in car number 1 now, yelling at us to get to the front. Guys, start driving it. You got to lead out Lance Armstrong in the cobbles. I'm up at the front before the cobbles start, and I'm thinking, there's no way I can do it. I weigh 137 pounds. But if my teammates arrive up there, I'm going to jump on their wheel and we're going to put on a show. Now, the big guys never made it quite to the front. They got tied up in the curb-to-curb action, and who was going to beat the Saxo Bank team at the 2010 Tour de France cobblestone stage when they got a leader like Fabian Cancellara? It wasn't going to happen. So I switched to the second mode as we're coming into the cobblestones. I always stayed just behind Lance Armstrong, so I was sweeping his wheel all the time. Anytime we got into the straightaways before going into the corners, I would weave straight out to the inside and block it so no one could come up this side of the road, which was putting a lot of wind on me and a lot of effort before we start the first cobbles. But the most important priority, of course, was Lance Armstrong and making sure he's in a good position. Every time we hit the first cobblestones, there was chaos all over. People crashing, bodies going everywhere. And then we come into one of the cobblestones, and it's Frank Schleck that goes down and ends up breaking his collarbone. Now, when he goes down, he causes chaos all over. And it's me and Levi Leipheimer on the right side of the road. My teammates that has been just behind us had made it through some holes in the peloton that was littered all over the cobblestones there with Frank Schleck sitting on the side of the road. And up the road was Andy Schleck and Fabian Cancellara, who was pulling like the TGV up there, trying to get Andy Schleck into a good general classification position. Now that Alberto Contador and Lance Armstrong had both missed the split. Now, what's happening up there I'll get to later, but what's happening in the back is pure chaos as myself and Levi Leipheimer are on the right side of the road. Levi's trying to get it going onto his bike, but the problem is there's like a cluster of bodies and bikes here, another cluster here with a little gateway of opening here, and a gateway on the left side. Levi and I are over here, and he can't get into this section to get going because it's like guys coming by on the 405 freeway, and you're sitting there at a dead stop trying to find an entrance to get onto the freeway. So I took my bike and I threw it out in the road, which blocked that hole. Then Levi jumped on his bike and shot through the hole. I jumped on my bike and tried to follow afterwards directly, but I couldn't get my foot into the pedal quick enough. As I finally got it in, I looked up. Levi wasn't waiting for me. At that point in time, I shut it down. I knew my stage 3 here at the Tour de France was just about getting to the finish, and all of a sudden, all the priority was the riders up front, and I was sitting in back. All I could do was rest the legs and wait for another stage. Well, as it comes to the finish of the stage, I end up having Levi Leipheimer back with me and a bunch of my teammates in my group, and we finished about 40th, 50th spot on the stage that day, and we lost about 3 minutes on time. Well, up front, Lance Armstrong finished in the group in front, but it was the 4th group and ended up losing about 2 minutes 40 seconds, but only about 1 minute 10 to Alberto Contador, which was the main threat. Now, when I come across the line, I go straight back to the Radio Shack bus, and this is when all the drama starts, right? You guys think, well, it all started at Radio Shack on the cobblestones. It really started in the bus. I get in the bus, and all of a sudden, there's drama all over the place, and Johan Bernil's upset, Lance Armstrong's upset, all the members in the team are all quiet, and we get up here, and we start trying to figure out what happened in the race. Well, what I didn't tell you happened after that crash was Lance Armstrong was bridging across the gap trying to get up to the front group with Fabian Cancellara pulling Andy Schleck. Andy Schleck wasn't waiting for his brother Frank because he was the bigger of the GC favorites, so they were going full gas, and like I said, Frank's Tour de France was done. So Lance Armstrong was going full gas trying to get across and end up flatting. Now he pulls over to the left side of the road, and he's got some teammates there to give him a wheel, and Popovich is waiting up the road. He's got Gregory Rast that either handed him the wheel or Dmitry Muriev did. I don't remember exactly the story there, but he gets the wheel, he gets going, and he's flying up the road. Now what happened? Why am I telling this story? Where's the betrayal line? Well, it's Levi Leipheimer, right? He's going full gas. He goes past the American rider Lance Armstrong, the 7-time Tour de France champion. As he's going full gas past Lance Armstrong, he doesn't wait, and on top of that, there's more chaos and more drama. As he's coming out of the cobblestones, he's reaching the back group, and as he's reaching the back group, there's my teammate Yanni Brackovic, and they don't come more loyal than Yanni Brackovic. The Slovenian is the most loyal teammate and fabulous teammate that I ever had the pleasure of rooming with. He was an amazing guy, and you always knew he was 100% for the team tactics and the best option for the team to win all the time. So Yanni Brackovic is dropping out of the back of the group as Levi Leipheimer is coming full gas, yelling at him to go. Now Yanni's like, hey, I gotta wait for Lance. And Levi just tells him to go and pull him back up to the group. Well, he does what Levi tells him, of course, because Levi's the champion, right? So Levi gets up there, Yanni starts pulling full gas and pulls him back up to that next group. Well, there's nobody back there waiting for Lance Armstrong because he had Popovich with him, but Popovich ended up using up everything he had to get him through the cobblestones, and then Lance was on his own chasing all the way to the finish. Now, when I get in the bus and all the drama's going crazy, Levi's blaming Yanni for dropping back and not waiting for Lance and towing him back up to the group. And I'm sitting there thinking like, no, that's not possible. I know Yanni Brackovic very well, and like I said, I've roomed with him many times throughout my professional career, and they don't come any better. This is the best they come. And I think about it as I'm sitting in the bus seat there as we get back to the hotel, and the first thing I want to do is I get off the bus, I walk into my room, and I happen to be rooming with Yanni Brackovic, and I walk in, and he's sitting in there, and I said, Yanni Brock, I said, what happened? What really happened? Well, Yanni Brackovic was just devastated the whole time as he's telling me the story of what really happened. Now, I leave the room and I walk into Lance Armstrong's room and I go, guys, this is what really happened. Levi came by you, Lance, and full gas, and then at the end of the cobblestone, of course, told Yanni to wait just for him and go full gas and forget about you, basically. So when I look at the drama of all the stages throughout that year's Tour de France, the biggest had to be, for me personally, that stage 3 of the cobblestones, when you have a teammate pass Lance Armstrong on the side of the road, and he says, I didn't see him. Then he holds back, and then he keeps driving all the way up to Yanni, makes Yanni hold back and bring him to the group. And then when he gets in the bus, he lies about not seeing Lance Armstrong and not knowing why Yanni was dropping off the back of the group. Well, like I said, I went over to Lance and had the discussion with Lance. Lance, I'm sure, had the discussion with, of course, Johan Bernal. And then the next day in the bus before the stage started, the drama was still high, and all of us confronted Levi Leipheimer and said, what happened? Because I know what happened from Yanni Brockovich's story, because I heard it from him. I know what happened from my view, and now I've heard enough of the other view of the riders to know that, Levi, you passed by Lance Armstrong. Levi, again, held tough to his story of saying that I didn't see Lance Armstrong. And I sat there with all my teammates around, and I said, I find it hard to believe that you can go by on a cobblestone road that's probably no bigger than 15 feet wide, and it's a 7-time Tour de France champion on the left side of the road wearing red, right? And you couldn't see Lance Armstrong. Well, the drama had started from that stage 3 of Lance Armstrong flatting, and the betrayal from Levi Leipheimer throughout the next few weeks there at the Tour de France, and it never ended. The drama just kept getting bigger and bigger. As we know later in that 2010 Tour de France, Lance kept crashing all over the place. Levi and Andreas Klöden started racing for general classification. I started hafting the race for this beautiful little team classification trophy right here. That is so amazing, and the effort that I put in to win the team classification that year and to get on the podium on the Champs-Élysées. Well, this thing's just, so amazing right here. Oops, I just dropped it. But anyways, if you got to race the Tour de France, let me tell you, there's always going to be some drama throughout, whether if it's in your team, whether if it's in the peloton, or whether if it's just your teammates. Betrayal, as we saw with Levi Leipheimer in the 2010 Tour de France on stage 3, there's always going to be something exciting to keep an eye out for when we're talking about a Grand Tour, because 3 weeks of racing, guys, you couldn't even stay together 3 weeks with your own family without having some kind of drama. And you put that many guys together, you know it's going to be big and it's always exciting. That's why I believe you never play with the Grand Tours in terms of all the times they talk about making it shorter. No way. 3 weeks is what makes a Grand Tour, not 1 week of racing. So when you're sitting down on the couch and you're watching this year's Tour de France and you see the 4 big teams there all battling out, make sure you know there's going to be drama in the race, but there's going to be drama in the teams too. And there's always could be some betrayal. You just got to look a little deep for it. That was my story from the 23 cobblestones. Hope you guys enjoyed Story Time with Chris Horner. Like and subscribe. I'll see you on the next edition real soon.